Daniel often thought of his life as neatly ordered, if not particularly exciting. At 38, he had built a reputation in his suburban neighborhood as dependable, quiet, and comfortably reserved. His marriage to Clara had weathered its share of ordinary storms, late nights at the office, financial disagreements, silent dinners stretched over weeks. But outwardly, their home projected stability. To friends and neighbors, Daniel was the man who trimmed his hedges on Sundays and waved politely while carrying groceries inside. It was a portrait of normalcy, though beneath it lay a growing ache he rarely acknowledged, the gnawing absence of closeness in his marriage. The Thompsons lived next door, a cheerful couple nearing retirement. Their son, Ethan, returned home from university that summer. Daniel had seen him before, only in passing, a polite nod exchanged at the driveway, or a fleeting glimpse as Ethan helped his father carry boxes from the car. Ethan was younger by more than a decade and a half, a fact that made Daniel feel both detached and strangely curious. When Ethan appeared on his doorstep one warm evening, Daniel assumed it would be for something trivial, perhaps borrowing tools or asking about a local service. Instead, Ethan asked for advice. "I'm thinking about internships," Ethan explained, standing awkwardly with his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. "My dad said you've worked in consulting for years. Could we talk? I don't really know where to start." Daniel was taken aback, though flattered. Few people sought his guidance with such earnestness. Clara, buried in another round of deadlines, had long since stopped asking about his perspective on anything beyond household logistics. The invitation to share experience with someone who listened attentively stirred something inside him. That evening stretched longer than Daniel expected. He brewed coffee, and Ethan settled into the armchair opposite him, leaning forward with a restless kind of energy. Their conversation began with professional choices, but soon drifted wider. Ethan's uncertainty about adulthood, his doubts about belonging at school, and his restless search for direction. Daniel responded with anecdotes from his own younger years, careful not to reveal too much, but enjoying the sharp curiosity in Ethan's gaze. In the days that followed, Ethan returned. Sometimes he carried a notebook, other times only his easy grin. "I wanted to ask you something else," he would say, or, "Do you mind if I pick your brain?" Daniel told himself it was harmless mentorship, the kind of neighborly goodwill anyone would extend. Yet each visit lingered longer, stretching into hours marked by laughter, pauses, and the faint hum of connection. Daniel began to notice details he had overlooked before. The way Ethan's eyes glimmered when he joked, the earnest tilt of his head while listening, the casual sprawl of long limbs across the couch. He told himself not to read into it, but the subtle awareness refused to leave. When Ethan smiled at him, open, unguarded, Daniel felt an unfamiliar heat ripple beneath his composure. At home, Clara remained preoccupied. Her calendar overflowed with meetings and dinners, her phone buzzing late into the night. She was present in the same rooms, but distant, her attention parceled out to obligations beyond their marriage. Daniel did not blame her. He too had learned to bury disappointments under routines. But in the silence that stretched between them, Ethan's presence felt like oxygen. The shift was subtle, yet undeniable. A brush of fingers when passing a mug of coffee. A glance that held a fraction too long. A conversation that dipped into confessions better left unspoken. Daniel found himself rehearsing boundaries in his mind, only to abandon them the moment Ethan arrived at his door again. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Daniel realized he was anticipating Ethan's knock with something dangerously close to longing. The sound of footsteps on gravel made his pulse quicken in ways it had not for years. He tried to convince himself it was nothing more than the joy of being needed, the validation of guiding someone younger. But when Ethan's figure appeared at the doorframe, his easy smile bright against the fading light, Daniel's heart betrayed him. He knew then that the visits had shifted from innocent requests for advice into something neither of them dared to name. And still, he opened the door. The rhythm of Ethan's visits became almost predictable, though Daniel pretended not to notice. Twice a week, sometimes more, Ethan would appear with a casual knock and a disarming grin, slipping into the house as though it were the most natural thing in the world. What began as structured discussions about internships soon dissolved into sprawling conversations that touched every corner of life: childhood memories, hidden insecurities, even half-formed dreams Daniel had not spoken aloud in years. Daniel told himself he was simply being generous, lending a sympathetic ear to a young man navigating uncertainty. But the truth revealed itself in the details he could not ignore. The eagerness with which he prepared the living room before Ethan arrived, the extra effort he made to look sharp even on weekends, the flicker of disappointment when a day passed without a knock on the door. Ethan, for his part, seemed equally invested. His laughter came easily, but beneath it lay moments of striking sincerity. One evening, as the rain tapped gently against the window, he admitted, "Sometimes I feel like I don't fit anywhere. At school, I try to blend in, but I always feel like I'm holding something back. Like there's more to me than people want to see." The words lodged in Daniel's chest. He recognized the sentiment too well, though he had long ago buried that part of himself beneath the safe fabric of marriage and routine. He nodded, careful, his voice low. "You're not alone in that. A lot of us carry things we never fully share." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. Rather, it was charged, as though both men understood more was being said than spoken. Ethan's eyes lingered on Daniel's face, searching, questioning, but Daniel broke the moment with a forced chuckle and a change of subject. Still, the memory of it followed him into sleep. With each encounter, boundaries blurred further. Ethan would lean close when making a point, his hand brushing Daniel's arm as if by accident. Once, while scrolling through his phone to show a picture, Ethan placed it in Daniel's palm, their fingers briefly interlaced. The contact was fleeting, but Daniel's skin burned long after the moment passed. At home, Clara's absence grew more pronounced. She returned late from work dinners, sometimes too exhausted even to exchange more than a few words. On weekends, she disappeared into errands and commitments, leaving Daniel to tend the quiet house alone. Their intimacy, once warm if not passionate, had thinned to polite civility. Daniel told himself he remained faithful out of duty, but beneath the surface, desire stirred restlessly. One Friday evening, Ethan arrived with a bottle of inexpensive wine, declaring with a grin, "We need to celebrate. I finally landed an interview." They poured glasses and settled into the living room, laughter spilling freely as the hours slipped by. The conversation grew more personal with each sip. Ethan leaned back, his tone softer now. "Daniel, can I ask you something? Did you always know what you wanted? In life, I mean, who you were, what you wanted from people." The question struck deeper than intended. Daniel hesitated, swirling the glass in his hand. "Not really. I think I made choices that seemed safe. Choices I thought would make sense to everyone else." Ethan's gaze held his, unwavering. "And do they make sense to you?" For a moment, Daniel could not breathe. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with unsaid truths. He wanted to answer honestly, to confess the restlessness gnawing at him, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he looked away, muttering something vague about responsibility. Still, the exchange left an indelible mark. The air between them had shifted, no longer innocent, no longer simple. When Ethan finally left that night, Daniel lingered by the door long after, his mind replaying the intensity in the young man's eyes. He understood then that they were drifting into dangerous territory. Yet the following week, when Ethan arrived again, this time with no pretext, no notebook, just a quiet smile, Daniel did not send him away. By then, he no longer could. The storm that had been gathering between Daniel and Ethan finally broke on a quiet evening when Clara was away at a work conference. The house felt unnaturally still, its silence amplifying every sound: the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the quickened pace of Daniel's heartbeat. He had invited Ethan under the pretense of reviewing interview strategies, but both men knew the conversation would drift elsewhere. Ethan arrived with his usual ease, though his eyes carried a spark of something unspoken. They sat in the living room, papers spread on the coffee table, but the discussion faltered after only a few minutes. Instead, The pauses grew longer, the glances more lingering. Daniel felt the weight of each silence pressing down, pulling them closer to an edge neither had yet acknowledged aloud. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," Ethan murmured, staring at the untouched notes. "Interviews are always nerve-wracking," Daniel replied automatically, though he knew Ethan's words reached further than careers. Ethan lifted his gaze, his voice lower now. "That's not what I meant." The air thickened. Daniel's throat tightened, yet he did not look away. Every rational voice in his mind screamed for restraint, but the longer he held Ethan's eyes, the quieter those voices became. It began with a touch, simple, almost accidental. Ethan's hand brushed Daniel's, lingering where it might once have retreated. Daniel did not move. Instead, his fingers shifted, answering the contact, betraying the loyalty he had clung to for so long. The first kiss was hesitant, almost timid, yet electrified by the weight of years of denial. Daniel felt the world tilt, his body betraying the vows his mind still clutched. Ethan pressed closer, and Daniel allowed it, surrendering to a need he had buried too deeply to deny. For a fleeting moment, he felt alive in a way he had forgotten was possible. But exhilaration gave way swiftly to guilt. Pulling back, Daniel rose from the couch, his voice hoarse. "This is wrong. I shouldn't." Ethan stood too, his expression open, unashamed. Then why did it feel right? The question cut deeper than Daniel expected. He turned away, staring at the rain-streaked window. His reflection looked older, conflicted, yet undeniably moved. "Because I wanted it," he admitted, barely above a whisper. From that night forward, secrecy became their companion. Ethan visited when Clara was working late, their encounters threaded with urgency and stolen moments. Each meeting carried the thrill of risk, the sound of footsteps on the porch, the quick glance at the clock, the hurried straightening of clothes before the door opened. Desire bound them tighter, yet so did the unspoken knowledge that they were building something fragile, unsustainable. Daniel felt torn in two. With Clara, he remained polite, distant, performing the motions of marriage without conviction. With Ethan, he rediscovered laughter, touch, and the reckless pull of being wanted. The contrast hollowed him, leaving him restless in his own home. Clara began to notice. Her questions, at first casual, grew sharper. "You've been distracted lately," she remarked one evening, her eyes narrowing. "Is there something I should know?" Daniel forced a smile, shaking his head, but the lie tasted bitter. Each evasion only deepened the shadow between them. Meanwhile, Ethan grew more attached. His texts arrived at odd hours, fragments of longing, half-jokes that masked deeper need. Daniel feared the intensity, yet he could not resist it. Every stolen moment tethered him more firmly to a choice he had already made, even if he refused to name it aloud. One night, Clara confronted him directly. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the overhead light casting harsh shadows. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady, "are you seeing someone else?" The question hung between them like a blade. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence stretched, heavier with each passing second. Clara's eyes searched his face, reading the truth he could not speak. In that moment, Daniel realized there was no turning back. Daniel sat frozen at the kitchen table long after Clara's question dissolved into silence. Her eyes remained on him, sharp and unyielding, searching for a confession he could not give. At last, she stood, her chair scraping the floor. "If you won't answer," she said, her voice trembling beneath its firmness, "then I already know." She left the room without another word, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The emptiness she left behind pressed against Daniel like a weight. He wanted to call after her, to deny, to explain. But what explanation could bridge the gap between the man he had promised to be and the man he had become? His mouth opened, but nothing came. For the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless. The following days were marked by uneasy quiet. Clara moved around the house with a cold efficiency, speaking only when necessary, her once kind eyes clouded with suspicion. Daniel found himself avoiding her gaze, terrified she might see the truth etched across his face. Guilt gnawed at him, yet the thought of ending things with Ethan felt impossible. The younger man had awakened something he could not put back to sleep. Ethan, oblivious to the growing storm, continued to reach out. His texts carried the same lightness. "When can I see you?" Or, "I miss our talks," but Daniel read them now with a complicated ache. Each message was both balm and burden, reminding him of the passion he craved and the betrayal it required. One evening, Daniel told himself he would end it. He rehearsed the words as he drove home from work, promising that the next time Ethan appeared at his door, he would draw the line. But when the knock came and Daniel opened the door to find Ethan smiling, damp from the drizzle, all resolve slipped away. They sat together in the living room, silence heavy between them. Ethan leaned forward, searching Daniel's expression. "You've been different lately. Did I do something wrong?" Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, it's not you." "Then what is it?" Ethan pressed, his voice soft yet insistent. "Because if you regret us, I need know." Daniel closed his eyes, torn between honesty and evasion. "It's not regret," he admitted finally. "It's fear. Fear of what this is doing to my marriage. Fear of what it means about who I am." Ethan's hand found his, steady and deliberate. "You're not alone in this. You don't have to be afraid with me." The words broke something inside Daniel. He leaned forward, closing the space between them, his lips meeting Ethan's with a hunger sharpened by guilt. For a few stolen minutes, the world outside ceased to exist. Afterward, as Ethan left, Daniel lingered at the doorway again. But this time his chest was tight, with more than desire. Clara's silhouette appeared briefly in the window across the yard, watching, waiting, perhaps already knowing. The next morning, Clara did not speak during breakfast. She stirred her coffee slowly, her eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. Finally, she said, "We need to talk. Not tonight, not tomorrow, now." Daniel's spoon clattered against the bowl. He nodded, his throat dry. The confrontation he had feared was no longer a distant possibility, but an imminent certainty. The hours until evening stretched endlessly. At work, he could not focus, his mind a loop of possible confessions, excuses, or denials. Each option seemed hollow, incapable of repairing the fracture already spreading through his marriage. When he returned home, Clara was waiting at the table, her phone turned face down, her posture rigid. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "If you respect me at all, stop hiding." Daniel opened his mouth, the words tangling on his tongue. Images flashed through his mind, Clara's weary smile when they first met, the warmth of their wedding day, the quiet joy of building a life together. Then, against it all, Ethan's eyes, burning with youth and desire. His silence stretched again, but this time Clara did not fill it. She only stood, her jaw set, her voice low but steady. "If you can't say it, I'll find out myself." Daniel's heart pounded as she turned and walked away, leaving him alone at the table, caught between the wreckage of one life and the dangerous promise of another. For the first time, he understood that his choices were no longer confined to whispers and shadows. They were about to break into the open, whether he was ready or not.